Parliament has approved a request by the Democratic Alliance to have a debate on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. The DA has shown support for Ukraine in the last week after lighting the Cape Town City Hall with the country's flag. We're joined now by the leader of the opposition, John Steenhuisen, for more on this. Mr. Steenhuisen, thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. So earlier on in the program, we've been tracking the arrival of students, South African students from Ukraine. One who would not speak about her trauma, but mentioned that South Africa needs to do something to help bring peace to that nation. Through this debate, how do you propose this be done?
Well, I think that South Africa needs to clarify its position once and for all about where it stands on this. We've got the DIRCO that issued a statement calling for the Russian withdrawal. That evening, the defense minister was attending a cocktail party toasting the might of the Russian army at the embassy. And 2 days later, the president himself walking away from that statement. I think South Africa needs to have an unequivocal position about where it stands, because there's an economic cost to the moral weaseling that we've seen by the South African government. And we need to understand what the implications as well of this crisis are going to be for South Africa. There are going to be real crises facing ordinary South Africans, and particularly the poorest of the poor, who are not able to insulate themselves against rising fuel prices, the cost of food going up, as well as input costs like fertilizer and fuel.
Much has been said about Mr. Andrei, who's the ambassador of South Africa to Ukraine, by a number of students who've trickled in from the war-torn nation, about how very helpful he has been. Your assessment of that, at least?
Well, I think that he is certainly been helpful. That's certainly been our report. But I think there's more the South African government could have done to get citizens out of that country far quicker and far easier, particularly in the light of the impending conflict. Unfortunately, this is not a strength area for South Africa, as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, when large numbers of South Africans were stranded abroad, and it took private initiatives and initiatives of political parties to get many of those South Africans repatriated and home. Certainly not a strength area, but obviously the individual you mentioned has certainly done, I believe, a good job in trying to assist as many South Africans to get out of the conflict zone as quickly as possible.
Mr. Steenhuisen, your thought on the school of thought that says, well, South Africa should not grandstand on this position of Russia and Ukraine, but rather continue to call for what they say is dialogue between the two countries to bring about a solution.
Of course you must have dialogue, and of course we've got to be on the side of peace. But what you can't do is be neutral in the face of overwhelming aggression by one nation against the sovereignty of another. You cannot have a moral equivalence between the position of Ukraine and the shelling of ordinary citizens, the destruction of cities, and the refugee crisis that's now has been created by the Russian Federation's invasion of that country. Dante famously said there's a hottest place in hell is reserved for those who maintain the neutrality in the times of great moral crisis. And I think South Africa's neutrality here has created a moral crisis for itself, and it has put South Africa in a difficult position, and there are going to be economic consequences for that. So I don't think it is a matter where we either are for peace or you are for war. I think everyone's on the side of peace, but we must speak out against bullying and aggression when it occurs in the world. We've seen, as history has shown us, that once people get away with bullying behavior or get away with this type of aggression, that it always ends badly. They want more, they push for more, and the Second World War was brought about because the world did not stand up quickly enough to the bullying tactics of a dictator and his invasions of the sovereignty of other countries.
You talk of speaking out against bullying and aggression. I wonder what you have made of images that we have seen of countless number of Africans who were denied entry onto trains to flee the war-torn nation because they were not Ukrainians or because they were not white according to them.
Well, obviously, that's very disturbing, and we've seen the disturbing images of a variety of things being flashed across the global headlines. And, of course, we must speak out against all forms of discrimination wherever they exist. The reality is that that country is now a war zone, and there are going to, unfortunately, be civilian casualties. That is what happens when a a aggressor goes in and uses artillery and military might to force their way and have their voice heard, rather than using the channels that are available for dialogue and debate around the world. And unfortunately, those scenes have been caused directly as a result of the aggression that we've seen being perpetrated by the Russian Federation. And it is certainly unfortunate, unacceptable, and that refugees should be treated the same no matter whether they're Syrians, whether they're South Africans, or whether they're Ukrainians.
Please allow me, while we have you on the line, today news coming through that the vote on no confidence against President Cyril Ramaphosa and his cabinet will take place on the 30th of March. But there's also been an announcement that it will be an open ballot as opposed to a secret ballot. Your response on this?
Well, there's two motions. The one is a motion brought by the ATM party, and that's a motion of no confidence in President Ramaphosa. And that's not been brought by the Democratic Alliance. Our motion is a motion of no confidence in the cabinet. We believe it's problematic in a number of aspects, and that the Speaker is clearly ducking out and protecting the executive, and the fact that she's not allowing an in-person debate to take place and a vote. And we believe that every member of Parliament should be expressing their vote personally in an open sitting of Parliament, so that they're able to be able to exercise their conscience. We also believe there's an unanswered question, and that's the conflict of interest that exists. Will members of the executive who have a clear conflict of interest in this matter themselves be allowed to vote? The Speaker seems to think they will. We look at the rules of Parliament, particularly Rule 30, read with the Code of Conduct, and it speaks very clearly about financial conflicts of interest. And we believe that that ministers have over 2.5 million rand financial conflict of interest in this vote, and we're going to have to test whether that whether they are going to be able to participate in the vote on determining whether they remain in office or not, because that is a clear conflict of interest. So I think that it's not as cut and dried as the Speaker would like to make out, and we certainly look forward to pushing these issues in Parliament over the coming weeks, and we hope that good sense is going to prevail, failing which we'll obviously once again have to approach the courts to adjudicate whether in fact the Speaker is acting in a way that is fair and proper. Members of Parliament act in their individual capacities, and that's why there's always been a provision in Parliament for voting to take place on an individual basis. What you don't have is a situation where a party block is just simply assumed as a vote. That's why each member in Parliament has a voting console, so they're able to exercise their vote according to their conscience. And we believe in this matter, particularly in the motion of no confidence in the Cabinet, that members should be present in a venue and should be allowed to express themselves according to their conscience. It shouldn't be a matter of the ANC chief whip standing up and saying, well, the ANC in toto does not support this motion. There very may be ANC members of Parliament who don't support the Cabinet, who don't have faith in the Cabinet, and I think they should be allowed to exercise their conscience as members of Parliament.
Democratic Alliance leader John Steenhuisen, thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon.